Coming up on This Week in Google, Kevin Marks joins me, Jeff, and Gina, because Leo's out at NAB. We're going to talk all about the Oracle Google court case, what the wider implications of that are. It's going to lead to a patent discussion. We're going to talk about Twitter's IPA. Is it as good as the kind you drink? And Tim Berners-Lee has hope for the internet. All that and more coming up.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for This Week in Google is provided by Cachefly. CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twig, episode 143, recorded April 18th, 2012. We love IPA. This Week in Google is brought to you by Go to My PC. Take care of last-minute requests from anywhere, right from your phone, with the Go to My PC app for iPhone. Visit gotomypc.com for your free 30-day trial and use promo code TWIG. And by Stamps.com. Use Stamps.com to buy and print real U.S. postage using your own computer and printer whenever you need it. You'll never have to go to the post office again. For my special $110 bonus offer, go to Stamps.com today and use my promo code TWIG. And by Ting.com. Ting gives you big savings and billing clarity for mobile phone service. Try their online savings calculator and save $50 on your device purchase at Ting.com/Twig. It's time for Twig, This Week in Google. I'm Tom Merritt, filling in for Leo Laporte, who's at NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters. But we have your familiar panelists to make you feel reassured that everything will be just as good as usual. Joining us this week, as always, Gina Trapani from smarterware.org. Welcome, Gina.
Howdy.
I just upgraded my smarterware to 1.04, my ThinkUp.
Oh, yay, ThinkUp upgrade. Woo-hoo.
Yeah, my ThinkUp. ThinkUp is one of the smarterwares. One of the smarterer.
One of the smarterware. Don't tell anybody else, Tom, but you're one of our favorite users.
Oh, thank you.
Perhaps our favorite.
Stop.
Just you.
We could go on forever, but we have to introduce Jeff Jarvis, too, of BuzzMachine.com, author of Public Parts.
I'm kind of here.
You are definitely here on our end. I know we're fuzzy to you a little bit. But
I'm screaming about university IT departments right now.
If you hear screaming in the background, it's probably the IT department visiting Jeff. And our guest on the panel this week, Kevin Marks, Tumblevision.tv, always braving a new frontier to bring us his video. You're in a conference room or a conference hallway.
I'm a conference hallway. My neighbor was wood chipping an oak tree, so I came over to demo and sat in the hallway.
That always makes me think of the movie.
Sat in the park. But.
It always makes me think of the movie Fargo when I hear a wood chipper. Don't look too closely at what he's throwing in there. All right, well let's get on with the show. Starting with the Gmail downtime yesterday, got everybody all panicked. Google at first said they were investigating, then they fixed it. It was only down for less than 2 hours. They said it affected less than 2% of users. Then they revised that up, said maybe it affected less than 10% of users. And they said it's possible that some users may still experience delays with the delivery of certain messages while account access is restored. I never ran into it. I use Gmail for all my email practically. Did anybody else?
I did, yeah. I saw the outage. I just sent a couple of pictures from my phone, and I was waiting for the that sent sound, and I didn't hear it, and then I went in Chrome and got the error number 739, retrying again, and it counts down in seconds. Even if it was just 10% of users, that's a lot of users. That's a lot of people. And I was sort of amused by the panic on Twitter, like where's like Gmail is like breathing. It's like you can't get through a workday without having Gmail for a while. But it came back for me within like 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. It wasn't a big deal.
Either I wasn't affected or I just never checked email. Jeff, were you lucky enough to dodge it?
I didn't notice it at all.
Yeah. What about you, Kevin?
I didn't notice it, but I was on my phone and traveling a lot yesterday.
So you were really in the best test case for it.
That's right.
Well, I had problems with Google Docs in the afternoon, but I don't think that has anything to do with this. And who knows what it had to do with it. It's always weird the way Google Docs works with Chrome. And I've got a solution to one of my problems that I had with Chrome and Google Docs that we'll talk about in the tools at the very end of the show. How's that for a tease ahead? Ooh. All the way. Don't stop listening. Don't stop watching. But let's talk about the World Series of Intellectual Property trials. going on. That's actually what Judge William Alsup, who's presiding over the case in San Francisco District Court, called the Oracle Google trial. And it's the trial of two Larrys as well, Larry Page and Larry Ellison, both taking the stand. Larry Ellison took the stand in person first. Larry Page had his deposition played. Then Larry Ellison took the stand. It is kind of like a stage.
It's like a mini tech conference, isn't it? They both have their PowerPoints.
It sort of is, right? Larry Page in his deposition was asked about some particularly damning emails involving Andy Rubin. They tried to get him to admit that Andy Rubin ran a presentation called "Must Take License from Sun." Page said he couldn't confirm that. He didn't know if that was true or not. Larry Ellison followed on the witness stand yesterday afternoon. Was asked whether or not it is expensive to develop APIs. He sort of sighed dramatically, said, arguably, it's one of the most difficult things we do at Oracle. Then he discussed the licensing, stated Google was the only company he knew who didn't take a license, even a GPL license, for the APIs, which what Oracle's trying to do here is say that Google's using the APIs, 37 APIs, without permission from Oracle, and therefore they're violating copyright that Oracle has over theirs, even though the rest of Java is open source. Larry Page then took the stand after Larry Ellison, and he continued this morning and basically said, look, if there were no APIs, we would only have a language. You would be able to write basic computations that never did any input or output, had any communication with the outside world or the underlying platform. It would be like trying to call Jeff Jarvis. You just get that, the person you're trying to reach is not available.
Dang it.
You don't have an API.
I thought it was so elegant. Dang.
Yeah, Jeff dropped off. We're trying to get him back. But that's what this all boils down to is Oracle is trying to say that Google ripped off the APIs from them to make Java work on Android because they didn't use the official Java machine. They made their own with Dalvik, and therefore they owe Oracle money. Google's trying to say, no, this is an open source operating system, and the APIs are included with that because not open source operating system, but open source programming language, because no programming language is worth anything without APIs. Gina, where do you fall on this? It's going to be up to the court to rule.
It is. This whole case seems like quite a bit of theater. It seems like these two companies probably could have worked this out or settled sooner, and I'm surprised that they didn't. But at the same time, I'm kind of enjoying this conversation. How is this going to turn out in the end? To tell you the truth, I kind of take Google's side here, and I think you said on TNT yesterday, the metaphor you used is like saying, here's a language, here are the letters, but you can't use the nouns. The core APIs that they're talking about, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, are like core Java objects, like object and like number.
Yeah.
It's really kind of basic, and 37 objects, I think, in 15 million lines of Android code. So it's a very small part of Android code, and I'm a Java programmer. Java's was really my first language, and I would consider those APIs part of the language. Java doesn't do anything without them. So I tend toward thinking that Google's assumption that this was just part of the language seems reasonable to me. At the same time, other companies, according to Ellison, no other company didn't take the license. And, these companies should have been talking. It sounded like they were. There's a lot of backpatting when Android decided to use Java. But now it sounds like, Oracle just trying to get some money that they shouldn't have, and we're getting this kind of fun trial, fun to hear about and watch. I really liked Google's slides, which I think was posted maybe on The Verge. The Verge has been doing really great coverage of this trial. But yeah. I'm kind of Google on this one, Tom.
Yeah, well, the Google Slides, key points of evidence, Sun gave Java language to the public, which is true, but they didn't necessarily give the mobile implementation of it to the public. Google built Android using free and open technologies. Sun publicly approved of Android's use of Java, and they make use of quotes from CEO Jonathan Swartz praising Android after it was released and the utilization of Java. And Google made fair use of the Java language APIs in Android, which is their big argument is that we're not violating copyright law, that APIs have to be used to make a programming language. Programming language isn't copyrightable, therefore it's fair use. Kevin, what do you think? Do you agree with Gina that Google's probably got the better argument?
I think it's true. I think they definitely have got the better argument. And it's notable that they've backed away from the whole patent thing that was wrapped around in this to begin with. And they're now trying to argue copyright, which is a much weaker thing to argue. You can defend copyright on many other grounds for infringement. You can argue that it's fair use and so on. So I think that this is... I'm not quite sure why they're persisting with this. I really don't understand what Oracle is trying to gain from this. That all they're likely to do is make people aware of using their technologies in future, because people may do this. Oracle owns another big chunk of open source technology, or owns the company that built it, which is MySQL. And there's definitely some nervousness there that people will say, wait a minute, if they're doing this with Java, is MySQL next? Well, they suddenly insist to use Oracle databases instead of running MySQL. So there is, I'm not quite sure what Oracle's game plan is in what they're trying to gain from this.
Well, Judge William Alsup agrees with you. I mean, he has tried over and over again to get these two companies to sit down and settle this, because that's usually what happens in cases that are similar. And he warned them at the opening of the trial yesterday, unless it's equivalent to the secret formula for Coca-Cola, what you say here is going to go public. And so are you sure if you want to go through with it, go through with it? And here we get Larry Page and Larry Ellison in sort of a little bit of a circus, getting up on stage and accusing each other of things and sighing, and Oracle saying, oh, we spend so much money to make these APIs and they just want to steal them from us. And Larry Page saying, you know what, all Oracle's trying to do is get some money out of us because they couldn't succeed in making their own smartphones. And there's been some quotations that Larry Ellison had said that they had tried to buy or considered buying RIM or Palm or that sort of thing. But in the end, it's really kind of an obscure bit of programming law, which could be precedent-setting and damaging to both companies, no matter who wins.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, there is a sort of the world has moved on, I think, from the licensing situation as it was at the time of that language's creation, and the modern languages are presumed to be created in an open source environment. I don't think there's any language that's come out in the last 10 years that hasn't been open source. I could be wrong there, but I'm fairly sure that that's the way that the world has moved now. Certainly, if you look at Go or Dart, that are Google's two new languages they've promoted, or even the iterations of JavaScript we have now, there's no presumption that anyone owns chunks of that.
Gina, do you worry that if Oracle were to win, you would have problems with programs that you've written using APIs?
I mean, absolutely. If the ruling is that APIs, core APIs, like the ones we're talking about in Java, are different than the languages themselves, then yeah, I mean that would be really bad, and I hope that doesn't happen. I think, I mean, then it just becomes open to interpretation. Anybody can sue anybody for using the most basic APIs or objects in new languages. It just seems absurd. So I hope this doesn't go Oracle's way. I am concerned about what that would mean for developers and for future lawsuits.
Well, explain a little bit about why that is, because we talked about this on Tech News today, and we got a couple developers wrote in and said, well, look, if I write in Apple's operating system, they've licensed everything, so I don't have to worry about it. If I write for somebody else's Java runtime that's licensed through Oracle, I don't have to worry about it. It's only on Android that I have to worry. Is that but if APIs become copyrightable, what is the increased worry?
Yeah, I mean that's true. I mean for indie developers kind of making things that they are from a company that have already paid the licensing fees, it's not as big a deal. But what's the difference? Is this just because Google's has this huge, is this juggernaut and has the money, and like Android's been so? I mean, what's the line? There's always that concern. As soon as something gets popular or starts making money, everybody wants a piece of it.
Right. You may be fine now.
Right. But later, if you're successful, it's that being a target.
Jeff, I know you're struggling with your technology there.
Am I on now?
You are on, sir. I think we finally figured it out. What's your take on this whole World Series of Intellectual Property trials?
Well, here's the question I have, and it's really, as is my one, an ignorant question. Were other industries like this, or?
Oh, you went mute. I don't know if you muted yourself or if you or what, but we can't hear you now. You're still talking, Jeff, but we can't hear you. You're talking about something long and thin. But
Jeff looks like he's saying something really intelligent right now.
You got muted, Jeff. You got muted. Right when you were starting to ask the question. Did you? But we could see it just fine, so I feel like something just got muted on the computer or something like that.
Adventures in Skype audio.
Right. This is Oracle and Google. They don't want us to talk about this. They're doing everything in their power.
It's a conspiracy.
Yeah. All right.
That's it. They've copyrighted Skype APIs.
I think
Tom.
what Jeff's face there was saying everything. Kevin,
I think he's going to do Pictionary pretty soon.
I want to hear
Draw
what Jeff's
something.
dumb question was. He said it was because Jeff doesn't have such a thing as a dumb question.
Draw something, Jeff. Draw something.
Okay.
He's so mad.
He's going to toss that computer out the window here in a second.
Oh, now I can hear you again. Can you hear me?
There we go.
Yes.
Now we can hear you.
There you are.
It's not the computer. It's the whole building.
That's the
hear me
whole
now?
building out
Yes.
of the window.
Yes, we can hear you.
It's a big building made of metal.
Wait, he doesn't know that we can hear him?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay, no, I got it. I'm just having a fit.
Okay.
Did you hear my dumb question or not?
No,
No.
we heard you start your dumb question, and then that was it. All I saw was this. There's something involving
Yeah, there was a hand. There was
involving that. That's all I got.
Hand waving.
That's the guillotine in which I'm going to put the head of corporate IT here. All right. My local people are wonderful, but the chancellor's office, I'm ready to scream. Anyway, here's my dumb question. We're in a world now not of vertical industries, but of ecosystems. And so I wonder whether this is becoming more prevalent. This is my direct question. Was it always like this? Was it like this in cars and refrigerators? Or the fact that you have companies, gigantic companies now, that share technology, that share business relationships, that are interdependent, that have all kinds of more complex relationships than they used to be, is this a sign, is all this litigious hostility, one-upsmanship in patents, which we'll get to again later with Twitter, is that a sign of a new corporate infrastructure, or am I just being ignorant?
Kevin?
I think we've had some back and forth on this before. There was the long-running Apple Microsoft look and feel lawsuit. There was the Canyon lawsuit where Microsoft actually was found to be Microsoft and Intel had a subcontractor who'd pinched code that they'd used for Apple and so on. So there are some precedents for this 10, 15 years ago. But the usual détente was that you would then come to an agreement, cross-license the patents and move on. And it was only the sort of patent trolls that had basically taken a patent from a small company and were using that to extract money directly, like Acacia or like Aeolus, that were actually going around and extracting money from each other. And in the last year or two, there has been this outbreak of big companies suing each other. And some of it is arguably fading companies suing the new ones because they're worried about what's going on. But from their point of view, they see these people as stealing their ideas. Even the Steve Jobs quote about that is quite shocking in contrast with his quotes from the mid-90s, where he proudly says that great artists steal. So it's interesting to see the dynamic there. But the other thing is that I think that the culture has changed. There was in the 80s, the presumption was that you would reverse engineer things, and there was a presumed way you could clean room something. So you would take someone's code and establish what the API to it was by having a set of engineers derive that. Then you have another set of engineers write to that API, which was ridiculously time consuming. But that was how you could create a clone of something, and that was a presumed good faith way of doing it. So they're arguing even against that precedent here. But since then, there has been this sort of this outbreak of trying to cause vexatious problems later. So, but the other half of this, I spent the weekend at the Wall Street Journal Data Transparency Hackathon, and I thought, okay, I've got to build something from scratch. Let's make it hard for myself by using an environment I haven't used before. So I set myself up with Node.js on Heroku and built stuff in that. And the thing that was fascinating to me about that was how much that presumed that the world existed in GitHub. So with Node, you just say require this thing, and it goes and pulls it down from GitHub and installs it for you and puts it there. And then when you go to deploy it, the server at the remote end does the other end. And you can say, get the latest, get version X, whatever. And there is a presumption that all versions of everything you might want to use exist in a repository you can get at, and you can just pluck it out of the net and have it working. And that was, I knew that that the world had moved in that direction for programmers, that we had this presumption that everything's available and can be forked and adjusted. But I think Node is the first language environment that's been built after that, and therefore takes that as its basic presumption, doesn't have to build a separate repository of libraries that you then have to deal with. And I think in some ways it's the Java legacy of having all these libraries that are bound up to it, and a de facto part of the language, if not de jure, is what's being fought over here. And in a sense, just it makes that less relevant to modern development as well.
Yeah, I think when I'm trying to answer Jeff's question about has it always been like this, I think it goes in cycles, and I think what you're talking about, Kevin, is identifying people who are reacting to a certain part of the cycle that was beneficial to openness, right? This idea that we can reverse engineer, and I wonder, I don't know this, but I wonder if a lot of that attitude was fostered because a lot of the base technology was developed by government and military, and therefore made available on a more open basis. The internet protocols were made available on a more open basis. The web was developed at CERN, where they decided to release it without a license.
So you're saying that the norms of this new society were set by that. Then commercial interests came in with different structures.
And the reason maybe we see it more in mobile than we see it in regular platforms is because mobile is operating in a different arena. They're not based on that same legacy. And so we see something that's more like the 1800s, where the Edisons are all fighting against all the other innovators to decide who gets the patents and who gets to innovate. And particularly, I thought about FM radio, which was fought by RCA in the courts for decades, because they were afraid of it. They didn't want it to roll out. And so FM radio didn't get cleared of all of its patent issues until the 60s, and that's why we didn't get FM until that late.
Certainly, the media industry has a long history of patent fights back and forth. Television was the same. There was lots of stuff there and there was the canonical lone inventor story with Farnsworth fighting back against
right.
I think it was RCA again there. So that there is some history of that, but I think there were generations of that in computing as well. There are chunks of stuff that was built and patented and fought over. But the model then was that you would have a sort of license cartel. You'd put together a trade group that would gather the patents up and put an agreement together, like the MPEG-LA, for example, in video. Sure. And that model held for a while, and that was the presumption of how things worked. And it was often a way for the larger companies to extract rent from the smaller companies potentially, because it meant that you had to pay that license. But because there was some mutual agreement around it, they would get the rates to a sensible level. And there was grandstanding that. When I was at Apple, when we were releasing QuickTime 6, I think it was, which incorporated MPEG-4. We held back the release until they changed the MPEG-4 license terms to make it possible for people to use it without paying the money, and that was a fairly large piece of corporate grandstanding by Apple, if you like, because basically the current MPEG-4 licensing model has a floor and a ceiling to it, right? If you're sending streams less than a certain amount, it doesn't cost you anything. If you're implementing more than a certain amount, it's capped at several million a year, whatever it is. So that was the rule set that Apple helped get them established to actually make sure this stuff was usable. But that's still quite, there's still quite a lot of money to Microsoft or Google or Apple. 5-10 million a year is not that much. But for a small company that wants to compete with them in building a video streaming network, that is an issue. So there is, the historic way has been problematic. One of the things that's interesting about Google, and it's something that Sergey Brin was saying this week as well, was that they were built with the presumption of an open internet, and their corporate culture has that as a basis. And I think he walked back a bit of his discussion of that in the Guardian, but he was basically saying that one of the threats is that the newer companies are not taking that, they're not following that example. And certainly it's something that I remember having a conversation with Microsoft execs about this, where they were saying, what is Google trying to do here? Is this these open source operating systems trying to destroy us? And my answer was no, they're not trying to destroy you. It's just that's their presumption of how things work. Their worldview is the right thing to do to solve a problem is to open source something or create a spec, Whereas Microsoft's worldview was, we need to add a new API to Windows. It's just the culture you come from. And that may be changing a little bit at Google. Some of the stuff we've seen with Google Plus and Vic Gundotra deliberately withholding APIs is a step away from that worldview. And maybe that's, their justification of that is that they're responding to more closely held stuff from Apple and Facebook. But I'm not sure that's a strong response.
Well, yeah, Kevin, I think Tom, you're onto something here. In as always, in a theme for the week, even is that there are presumptions about the architecture and norms of the internet coming in. So we see this suit going on, and not to get ahead of us on the list, but Kevin just brought up Sergey Brin did an interview with The Guardian, and he said afterwards, it was an interesting read, but it kind of distorted his views in some ways. What mainly he did was he walked back from criticizing the walled gardens of Facebook and Apple. And after praising them heartily for the want of future suits and negotiations, turned around and said, well, the problem was when we came on the internet, you could create an app with no toll booth. But now, basically, you want to get to users through Facebook, there's a toll booth there. You have to give a piece of what you do. And so you have, and then you have Tim Berners-Lee saying, give us back our own data. So there's The Guardian is doing a week-long series about the fight over the open and free internet. You have Brin, by the way, saying that the greatest threat to that is not companies, which you'd expect, but I agree with him. It is governments. Both tyrannies and governments like the U.S. on piracy. So we have a fight now going on about the society of the net and the norms and structures and institutions that make it up. Gina, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And I do think that there has been this cultural shift. I mean, I think the reason why I would just assume that those Java APIs are fair game is because I think just nowadays we make platforms, right? Like the web is a platform. It's just to, make things that other people can use to then make things on top of. And, of course, Brin was going to say that the web should be open because if it's not open, then, Google can't search it. I mean, that's Google's whole premise is on the idea that all this information is going to be out there and open. And sure, you have to sign into Facebook to use Facebook apps or to use Facebook, but Facebook is still a platform as well. But I forget what the initial question is. Oh, getting back to what Kevin was saying earlier about Heroku assuming that GitHub repositories are just available. I mean, I think that this is a fantastic kind of cultural shift around the idea that you create things, you modularize them, you make them available to the public for everyone to use, and there's the default setting is that it is available for anyone to use. And this kind of goes into another story, not to jump ahead, but the IPA agreement that Twitter put out.
It's a really important story of the week, but yeah.
And it's not about beer. It's a different IPA.
Right. It's not a different IPA. It's not India Pale Ale. Although I do enjoy a good IPA.
I'm not sure. I prefer the IPA beer over the thing that Twitter's doing. But what Twitter's doing is pretty interesting, too. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the stock split. We'll talk a little bit more about this battle for control of the internet series. But I want to tell you about Stamps.com, our sponsor for This Week in Google. Everyone knows going to the post office is a hassle. The limited hours, the parking. That's why we recommend Stamps.com, the fastest and easiest way to buy and print real U.S. postage for any letter or package right from your desk. You'll never have to go to the post office again. You'll get an easier way. You'll get a good rate. All you need is a computer and a printer, and you can use Stamps 24/7 whenever you need it. You don't have to work at somebody else's schedule. Post office might be closed, but Stamps.com is always open. We get all kinds of good examples from people who are using Stamps.com with their business. One person says they're amazed how it makes it easy to access all the services of the post office, including international and certified mail. You might think, I got to go fill out those forms at the office, right? No, Stamps.com even offers discounts you can't get anywhere else, like 21% off on express mail, 15% off on priority mail, so it saves you time, and the postage costs less, too. I mean, what's not to love? Right now, Stamps.com is going to make it even better because you're watching Twig. Special offer for our listeners. Use the promo code TWIG and get a no-risk trial. You see that radio mic up there. You want to click on that. Go to Stamps.com, click on that microphone, type in TWIG, T-W-I-G, press the Go button, and all of a sudden, you saw that $88 thing? It's now a $110 bonus offer, including the digital scale and $55 free postage. Can't beat it, folks. Check it out, Stamps.com. before you do anything else. Go save yourself some money on postage. If you do any amount of shipping or mailing at all, it's going to make it worthwhile, and you get the free scale. If nothing else, you got a cool scale. But you're going to save money too, so go check it out. Stamps.com. We thank them for their support of This Week in Google. We mentioned the Battle for Control of the Internet series on The Guardian. Tim Berners-Lee in there today. Sergey Brin was in there Monday. We talked about him being beset on all sides by the inequities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil companies and governments. He made it clear today. I was mostly talking about the governments. He even admitted Google's got some ways to go with openness. He's like, we can improve too. Tim Berners-Lee today talking about how we need to demand our information from Google and Facebook. He's like, yeah, sure, you can get your Facebook archive. And yeah, Google's, providing you more and more access to information. He's like, but we need to have immediate access to all the data they hold on us all the time. He says it's interesting that people throughout the existence of the web have been concerned about monopolies. They were concerned about Netscape having complete control over the browser market until suddenly they started worrying that Microsoft had complete control of the browser market. So I think one of the lessons is that things can change very rapidly. People adopt things. He actually brought up a story about Gopher, somebody being concerned about Gopher in the early days. He said, you know what? As rapidly as people accepted Gopher, they got rid of it just as rapidly when something better came along. So it was a little bit of a reassuring, like, look, we need to demand this stuff and we can get it. Google and Facebook won't always be in charge.
Absolutely. To this story, I say, Alleluia.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I work on an app called ThinkUp. With the whole premise of the app is that it pulls all your social data from different networks, and I believe very strongly. I mean, Feature Zero and any piece of software you should be able to get out all the data that you put in. But even beyond that, we're pumping so much interesting social, personal, intimate data about ourselves and our lives into all these disparate systems. And we should have the right not only to have all that data, but to have it in a tool that gives us insights about ourselves that do more than just inform advertising companies, right? Which is what companies like Facebook and Twitter and all these other social networks want to do with your data. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to argue with Jeff about that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, and more effective advertising is fine. But also, there are other stories about our lives and other things we can figure out about ourselves and learn about ourselves if we had all that data in one place and was able to access it and slice and dice it and look at different ways. And I'm not going to make this into a commercial for ThinkUp, but I feel really strongly about this, and this is why I'm building ThinkUp. And I want to see a lot more tools that are kind of like this kind of layer on top of all these social tools that exist that other companies own, right? Like I want to see I want to create actually the Uber network, which is this peer-to-peer network which piggybacks on top of and aggregates all these silos owned by different companies that help people do more interesting things and find out more about themselves and their lives and how they can make it better with all this data that we're generating every day and feeding to these companies.
Gina, I think that's so the right way to put it. The debate in the privacy terms that I often deal with is about the right to be forgotten and to kill the data and get rid of the data. But which one understands part two, because you're saying somebody else has it out of control over it. You're turning that around 180 degrees and saying, well, when we create this, there's value to it that we're not able to get out.
Yes.
And that if you enable applications like ThinkUp app and others, and that layer you just spoke of, then we all understand the value that comes from that in new and important ways, and then shows the value of sharing and goes to the things that I want to see about the internet. And I salute that flag and whistle Dixie to it. Well, not Dixie, the Star Spangled Banner.
Public parts.
Grapes of Wrath. Wait, I don't know.
Whatever. Yeah, not Dixie. Not Dixie. No.
Kevin, did you read this Tim Berners-Lee article? Did you get a chance to take a look at it?
Yes, I did. Yes, no, I thought it was very good. He's Tim is very good at spotting long-term threats and things as well. So he speaks with the authority of building the internet in the first place, of building the web in the first place, rather. But he's warning about the problem of things moving inside these environments too. And as someone was pointing out in the chat room, who was that? Tolly. Twitter is not a great example of this. posts, and they've been sort of saying, "Oh, that's kind of hard, and we haven't got enough people." For the last 4 years, when the number of people they employ has gone up by 4 orders of magnitude. So I think that there's some fishiness there as well, and I think it would be great if they could just give you a download thing that both Google and Facebook have done, at least one, something towards that there. So Twitter is not like the shining light here, even though the IPA thing is a good thing.
Gina, let me ask you. Oh, I'm sorry, Kevin. Go ahead.
He said the other thing that Tim Berners-Lee was talking about was the UK government surveillance program, which is being discussed at the moment, but they haven't actually put a bill together. But they're trying to put a bill that allows them to keep track of not the contents of what you send, but who you're sending it to. I think is what they're trying to do, which is something they've tried to get through before. And there's a lot of noise about that going on at the moment. There is also, I'll give the link to this at the end of the program, but there's also currently going on by the UK government an open standards and patents consultation where they're asking for people's opinions on this. And it would be really great to send them some more opinions that aren't patents are a wonderful thing and open standards are a threat to businesses, which is a lot of the stuff they've been getting from the big players already.
Yeah, I feel like that surveillance and the CISPA bill that's here in the United States have the same issues, which they're not like SOPA, where people are like, wait, do we even need this at all? I think everyone says, well, we do need a way to catch bad guys. Okay, we all agree on that. But is this law the way to catch bad guys? Or, is being able to log everyone's emails and where they were going the right thing to do? Is it overbroad? Is it overreaching? And that's where the debate is about these things. I feel a little more hope for these sorts of laws that they at least possibly could be whittled down into something that's usable and acceptable to civil liberties, unlike SOPA, which I felt like was just dead in the water.
Well, yes and no. I agree with Sergey Brin here that the greatest threat to internet freedom is government. And whether that is tyrannies filtering the internet for dissent, as Sergey said, or whether it is governments of Canada and Australia going after the entirety of the internet for child porn, or the U.S. for piracy, or this UK effort for security. We have to be very, very cautious about that. And I think that government fancies itself as the protector of our freedom, and on the internet, it is the opposite. And I'm not trying to come out like an anti-government person either on on any end of the spectrum from Tea Party to Occupy Wall Street. But I am trying to say that we better be damned cautious.
Well, when the government comes and says, "Hey, I want to be able to, tap a phone of a drug dealer, gangster, criminal, murderer, etc.," I'm okay with that.
Right. Well, there are principles involved. One principle involved is that our email communication is sacrosanct, and our phone communication is sacrosanct to the extent that you have to get a warrant to go after it. So
and I think that should be the way with the email too.
I agree, right? But it's not the case that our private communication should be presumed to be private by government unless there is just cause and a warrant in due process. And so the issue here is, as always, is not technology. It is principles. And you deal with this at the level of principles, and then the technology fits in that. What we're trying to do is create new laws that deal with technology and with things that people don't understand, and principles get lost. That's where the real danger is.
I think
Can I ask Gina something earlier?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah.
Gina, back to your point where Kevin started on this, was describe for me an architecture and a set of APIs and a set of things that in the layer you describe, in the layer that you indeed are building, what is it as a principle that you would expect of Twitter, Facebook, Google, and so on? The things that Berners-Lee talks about in terms of giving our data, what does that look like? What form do you need it in? What is legitimately ours? What isn't? Because once I interact with somebody else, I don't just own the information, so do you. I put a picture up of you. We both have a claim on it. There's issues that get very complicated immediately. But ThinkUp is the beginning of an architecture that I think goes exactly what Berners-Lee is talking about, is give me what's mine. How do you describe that world at a level of principles?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I mean, I think data liberation is like just kind of chips at the beginning of it. It's just give me my stuff. I mean, the question of the data that you collaborate with others on, which is pretty much everything. I mean, an email conversation. Do I own a reply to my email or comment on my post? I believe I have part ownership in that, right? So I mean, the problem with data liberation is that when you just export your own data, it's kind of useless, right? When it's not plugged into this architecture of people, right? It's lost all context, and it's often very collaborative. So to me, it's a peer-to-peer network with full featured APIs that offer you access to your own information as well as your interactions with others and their responses to that information, right? Because we're not just publishing, we're not just broadcasting statements here. We're having conversations online, and this is the publishing industry is going through this change as well. So. The biggest point is that APIs should let you access all of your data. And a few people brought this up in the chat room. Twitter's API does not let you easily get more than 3,200 tweets, right? Because they're, the pulse of the moment. I think there are scaling issues, and there's a lot of tweets in cold storage. And I understand that Twitter's running a huge operation, but it still really bugs me. And part of the reason why I built ThinkUp is because of that sort of arbitrary limitation. Facebook lets you download your data to a bunch of HTML files. That's okay. That's a start. I think that the goal that I want to get to is something much more robust and alive. I mean, I think these have to be sort of live APIs that run and that talk to one another on a continuous basis. I don't think this is a one-time download zip file deal. And I think that it does involve getting data that you've collaborated with others.
So, Tom, if I may hijack for a moment longer, Kevin, you've built pieces of this architecture around the edges of identity. Mm-hmm. Describe your view of this more open architecture.
Well, I think Gina's spot on. The thing is, you need to build something that is actually fungible. You can actually move between services. So that points to writing open specs about how to do this rather than one particular company's APIs. And one of the things that's been less encouraging over the last few years has been the growth of a bunch of APIs from each company that are all they're all variations on a theme in many cases, but they're not actually converging on protocols as much as they used to. So part of the work we did with Open Social and then with other specs like activity streams and portable contacts was designed to converge some of this stuff. And there's still work going on around that area. There's the OpenID Connect work that's going on at the moment is trying to converge some of that initial login and getting your personal profile stuff out. But most of these companies have backed away from converging on the shape of the data that they're sharing, and I think that's a shame. To some extent, you can transform it. There's a lot of decent work going on where people will pull stuff from several formats and munch them together. If you think about if this then that. That's an example of one company that's trying to sort of provide all the shims to translate things from one to another. But you don't really want to have a translation between every two endpoints. It's much better if you've got a common format in between. That just makes life so much easier for everyone. And that's the piece that we've moved away from to some extent in the last few years.
It's just, Tom, I think a lot of this is coming back to your point earlier about the architecture and a level of principles. Whether those principles are the ones that Gina described in terms of being able to have access to our information, whether the ones that Kevin describes in terms of having the ability to have APIs to give us our tracks, the ones that you brought up in discussion in terms of government and mail and things like that. I fear, and the things that I yammer on about a lot about privacy and publicness, is that if we lose sight of these principles of this society we're building and get into these weeds, we're going to lose the battles. And that's why I like what Sir Tim was talking about and to an extent what Sergey was talking about, what my colleagues here have been talking about, is I think we've got to get that level of discussion up to principles.
Yeah. Well, and I think the internet has been significantly good about doing that. We may have some short-term memory loss and get distracted, from time to time. But when it gets important, people rise up and say, well, wait a minute. No, that's not how we want this to work. And there is a culture built into the internet of working around whatever is trying to get in our way.
Which is what Gina taught me,
Definitely.
that hackers will hack around, and we can't necessarily afford that luxury anymore.
Yeah. I think there's always a way to hack around, but you're right. We shouldn't rely on it solely. and just
because
say,
a law, in the meantime, a law will get passed that you can't hack around without going to jail.
and then you go move to Sealand.
Yeah.
Probably not the end solution. But you're right.
I don't swim.
No,
well.
you need to keep one eye on, maybe 1.5 eyes on what the governments are doing, because they're finally noticing. And then the other eye on building things like ThinkUp, building things like mesh networks, building
that's the best answer.
The ways to move around at the same time.
That and not to jump ahead, but when we talk about Twitter IPA, that's also an effort to create a new principle. And that's a good way to attack this.
This is all making me very thirsty. We need to talk about IPA in a second, but I want to take a quick break and thank one of our other sponsors, Go to My PC. Picture this. If I can paint you a picture. You're on your way home after work. It's dark. It's raining. Okay, maybe it's not raining. That's kind of depressing. But you check your iPhone and you see an urgent request that needs your immediate attention. Dramatic music plays behind you. Don't go back to the office and log onto your computer. That place is a cube farm. It's horrible. Here's a better way. Use Citrix's new Go to My PC app for iPhones, like having your work computer right in your pocket. Take care of all those last-minute requests from anywhere. You can still stop in the pub and get an IPA on your way home. Edit your PowerPoints, update your spreadsheets, work on any file right from your iPhone. You can also log on to your Mac or PC with Go to My PC app for iPad. That's right. You can use your PC, use your Windows PC on your iPad. The Go to My PC apps give you the best of both worlds, more freedom and more power. And it sets up in minutes. You don't even need IT to get involved. I know that makes Jeff happy. So now you can use your iPad and your iPhone to access all of your documents and applications stored on your home or office computer anywhere you go. And the best part is, because you're watching this show or listening even, you can try it for free. Visit gotomypc.com. That's GOTOMYPC.com. Click that Try It Free button. Then enter the promo code, you can guess it, TWIG, TWIG. Download the free Go to My PC app in the App Store. Try it out for 30 days. Rain or shine. It'll keep you from having to go back to the office and make your life easier. Go to My PC. We thank them for their support of This Week in Google.
Now, let me make clear that the IT staff here at the Community Graduate School of Journalism is the one that rescued me. I love them dearly. They're wonderful. It's always the next level up the line that causes some new thing that caused me problems, and I'm sorry to complain, but I want to make clear here because otherwise my life here would be miserable because I need them. Thank you.
No, not all IT departments are the same.
No.
Don't upset the IT department, Jeff.
Never.
No. I'm
survival tactic number one.
Never. I wasn't trying to get you in trouble. I apologize. I'm sorry. Let's talk about this Innovators Patent Agreement. That's what IPA is actually standing for in this Twitter situation. It seems to be a reaction to Yahoo's suit on Facebook, where they took some older patents and went after Facebook, and some of the people who had helped them with those patents were a little upset now that they were no longer at Yahoo, that they were being used in this way.
And a reaction to this whole insanity we're in, too.
Well, exactly, the wider patent fiasco that's going on. So Twitter has a policy here that says we will not use our patents for anything unless it's defensive. And you get to approve you get to control how we use the patents you're involved with as an employee. And even if we sell them to somebody else down the line, that company has to get your sign off when they use
or the very clever way they did it was that not just that so much as that if that company tries to use it to attack if company A attacks company B and you had a role in the patent in the middle, as the way I understand it is you retained the right, thanks to Twitter, to license to grant a license to company B, thus cutting the company A off at the knees.
Is that okay? So you're in control of that
patent. Yeah. To go out to that extent that you can license the person being attacked in an offensive way.
The whole point being that they want to make sure that the patents you work on are used as a shield rather than as a weapon. This is something they introduced in one of their I can't remember what they call it, but it's kind of a regular hacker meeting that they have within the company.
And then the next argument that came out from some people, some guy at Forbes poo-pooed this, and there's a little bit of poo-pooing, saying, well, what does now that Twitter has no business model, it now has no patent value, and what does this do to your fiduciary responsibility to Wall Street? Yeah, I take the point that if you presume that all business models are rapacious and ugly and awful and evil, then yes, maybe you reduce the value. But I really salute Twitter here, unless I'm missing something. I majorly salute Twitter here for standing up on, once again, a new principle. And it's a way to, I think, undercut the war and also to set a new standard. So now that Twitter does this, we have the responsibility, folks, to go to Google and Facebook and Microsoft and name the company and say, what about you?
I heard you groaning there, Gina. I mean,
You know what this does to the value of the company? It makes really great talent of engineers who care about how their work is used want to work for you.
Amen, sister.
I mean, it's just there aren't very many companies that I feel like I really want to work for this place. This agreement makes me want to work for Twitter, and this agreement arms me.
Twitter. Hiring moment. Twitter. You can get Gina. Take it now.
And it also sort of arms me with a negotiation, part of my negotiation of, whatever next job that I have. Well, it's not going to be for a while, so I'm trying to make my own jobs here. But I can go to any company that I want to work for and say, in my salary negotiation, say, hey, I want this too. If I'm going to file a patent while I'm your employee, a patent that's going to have my name on it, a patent on something I created, then I want this kind of control. I saw a lot of people say, this was just a PR move to recruit talent. If it certainly was a great recruitment move, and that defensive can be, the using a patent defensively can be interpreted very broadly, and it doesn't really mean anything. The truth is, this is better than the current situation, or the situation that my coworker Andy Baio was in when his company was bought by Yahoo, and now a patent that his name is on is being used to sue Facebook. If he had known better, his conclusion was, I will never file another patent. Okay, I can see that. But if you have to file patents, you want to do it with this new agreement. And the reason why I think that Twitter is sincere about this is that Twitter has been on this roll. They've just been releasing all these open source modules. Bootstrap is my favorite kind of layout framework for making new websites. Twitter just released a bunch of changes they made to MySQL for everyone to use and check out. And the IPA is, I think it's like Creative Commons licensed, or it's an open license. It's not exactly open source. But I just love the way that Twitter is making it's making a name for itself by modularizing its work, making it reusable for other tech companies, and setting an example, and really coming out looking like the place that you want to be if you're an engineer, except for the 3200 tweet thing. But the IPA thing is a great thing.
Or the support of other open standards as well. There's definitely been a lack of Twitter people in the open standards community for the last 5 years since Blaine and co left.
Mm-hmm. But every company has their advantages and disadvantages. The IPA, this is something that's good. This is a good thing. Definitely, yeah. It says something that we want to look at Salesforce to see if we can adopt it too. Yeah.
Peter Yared wrote a column up on CNET. He's a former Sun employee, and he was complaining how essentially when he left Sun and started a company, he had to violate his own patents to do what at that point had become widespread methods of building web applications, and that he wishes that this was the standard. He's like, fortunately, Sun, like Twitter, only used patents defensively. But here we have Oracle, who bought Sun, now using patents. There's at least 2 patents in that Oracle-Google case that they're going after Google for. Could this become a virus that infects the tech community in a positive way and ends the patent wars? Or are we always going to have an Oracle that's going to hold out and say, you know what, no, I'm going to ruin this, or a Yahoo?
Well, the problem is that is the problem. The problem is that that we can, we've had these sort of mutual non-suing agreements, which is what the patent licensing pools in effect are, or the cross-licensing pools that happen. But they're not obeyed by the trolls. It doesn't take many of these patents to be issued, then bought and sold through companies going out of business, and someone buys the patents from the corpse and then goes around with no actual business to defend, just a sort of shell company owned by lawyers that goes around suing everyone. So Mark Cuban just wrote a post about this because he's getting some grief because he just invested in Bringo, which is a patent troll company. He's saying the biggest business risk you don't know about is your business will be sued over patents, and your only possible defense is to invest in patent trolls, or tell Congress about it. And I wish he'd taken the tell Congress about it route rather than the invest in patent trolls, frankly. But maybe he can do both.
Well, he wants to make some money. He sees how much money the patent trolls are making. The guy's all about making money, I guess. I suppose that the theory that Peter Yared is putting forth on this column is that if enough employees get this right from enough different companies, then enough companies will find that a lot of the patents that they're working with or dealing with are controlled by employees, and there won't be enough patents that aren't controlled by employees that want to use them defensively to fuel the wars, so to speak. Jeff, do you think that's...
I do fear that, and I'm accused of being Pollyanna, and I think that right now we're all being a bit Pollyannish, because you have the fact that, Microsoft just spent $1 billion for AOL patents. What are they going to say? What? Is that chicken livers? You have Google buying Motorola in great measure to get the patents, and on and on and on and on. There's a huge investment made in these patents. So I don't know what we can do about the past.
Part of the thing is that as you say, the government is sort of paying attention, but also the culture is changing, and that the people in general are paying attention. I think that the Eolus lawsuit being overturned in February in East Texas, and basically having their patent revoked by an ordinary jury is a really encouraging step.
I agree with all that. I'm just matching Tom's question here. Is what, are we being too optimistic? Too simplistic?
Well, Kevin's not, because he says no. This isn't going to change. This isn't going to get rid of the oracles of the world.
No, it's not.
It's going to change quickly, but I think that the sort of not producing anything, sitting there being parasitic, suing people for patents isn't a long-term sustainable business model, precisely because it is parasitic and obviously parasitic, and we will eventually move against it as a society. But in the meantime, there are people who are going to continue doing that. It's not a new problem. I had a patent troll lawsuit against my company in 1990 that was completely specious, but tied us up for 9 months and made our products not get a version 2. So this is a long-standing problem in the industry. It's something that it tends to impact smaller companies more than larger ones, because it's very easy to be completely put out of business by a patent troll, because they can just tie you up in lawsuits and you can't afford to fight them.
Kevin, if I'm going off, sorry. Keep going. I was going to ask you a question. Keep going.
So also, when I was at Apple, there was a steady stream of patent lawsuits against QuickTime that was being fended off all the time by people who had patents on some video this or video that, and it's something that people are still very aware of. So it's a thing that's been going on for a long time. It's been growing. It may mean that companies will move to a place with a more favorable environment. The EU does not have software patents to the same extent the US have. They have a much tighter test for patentability, which means that you can. It's harder to get an injunction or a lawsuit going there, and that may mean that it makes more sense for people to develop software there. Certainly, I think Skype developing in Europe rather than America was on that basis, and possibly Spotify as well. They assumed that that being based there would give them some insulation against this, and they could then move to America once they had an established power base.
Kevin, if this is something you'd rather not talk about on the show, kick me under the table. But when you were kind enough to visit my office just yesterday here in New York, you talked about a view of what you would say about patents going to the UK.
Sure. I think I certainly like to talk about it. So the original goal of the patent was to publish trade secrets. This is what patent law was invented to do. It was to stop people using trade secrets and actually to be built on later. And so there was the limited term for patents was explicitly on that basis. And if you read the history of patent law in both the US and the UK, which the jurisdictions that started it first, that's what its idea was. However, we have a mechanism that's better than that now for sharing methods and secrets, and that's published open source and published open standards. These are places where people get together and say, okay, here's my mechanism, here's how I do it. So I think that to rebalance this would be to give immunity to the if you like, the GitHub infrastructure of software from patents, because they are fulfilling the original goal of patents much more strongly. And conversely, you could say, okay, if you want to patent software, fine, you've got to maintain a public source code repository for 20 years, and then at the end of that 20 years, people could use it. That may be a way to rebalance this. It's but the current situation is that patents are written to not make sense to engineers. They are written to be written in the most broad and nonsensical language possible, so that lawyers can then use them in the future to say, "Ha-ha, gotcha." As opposed to open source software and open specs, which are written the other way around because they're designed to be used interoperably. So reversing that presumption would be a good thing, I think.
I think that is a really good idea. The idea of sort of an immunity or something being granted. I think it might be hard to get the big boys to buy off on it, but if it could be done, I think it'd be fantastic. Although, to Gina's point, if all the engineers go and work for the companies that do the IPA type agreement, that could put a little pressure on too. Either way, I'm a big fan of IPA.
Well, that's part of the thing about open source is that open source is enormously attractive to engineers because it means that they know their code won't just disappear into a black hole when the company changes direction or their manager changes or they leave the company. So if you know you're going to be able to work on open source at a company, that is still a very attractive way of hiring people, and that's something that's true of Google and Facebook and Twitter and many of the companies that are supportive of open source. We're even seeing Microsoft getting into open source now with the OpenStreetMap support and things like that.
Yeah, they're so conflicted about it, but they're like inching towards it. They're like, yes, I guess we should.
They've set up a separate division that's supposed to be doing open source so they can try and firewall it off from Windows. And it's not clear whether they're doing that because the Windows group is trying to squash it, or they're doing that because they want to preserve the sort of patentness of the Windows thing. So but they're trying to make it work, and I think part of that is it's much more attractive for the engineers who are coming of age in this culture to work on open source. And the older engineers like me who've been through patent battles or who've been through having your entire software pulled out from under you because your project was cancelled or you left the company, it is very attractive to be able to make something that's open source and therefore transcend these institutions. And the other half of it from the institution's point of view is that it means that if you're using an open source project and your engineers move somewhere else, they're probably still going to maintain it. You haven't actually lost the investment in that you had because it was held behind the firewall. So the balance of power or the balance of ROI has shifted quite a lot in the direction of open source over the last few years, and that's becoming more obvious to companies over time. And I suspect that may be, as you said, that may be the other thing that makes this stuff more attractive.
Yeah, I think taking that broad view and saying, look, open source may have not conquered the desktop. Open source, may have some setbacks along the way, and we don't see big wins all the time. But if you look at open source where it was in 1993, around the birth of Linux, and where it is now, incredibly huge strides. It is an essential piece of
a good and optimistic point, Tom. Yes.
Yeah. All right, let's take a quick break. We got a Google Drive rumor to get to. We got to talk about the stock split, but I want to thank our other sponsor for this week in Google, Ting. I love this idea that they're doing at Two Cows. Two Cows, the folks who bring you Hover.com, have a new mobile service. And this is brilliant. It's about bringing billing clarity, usability, and big savings to mobile phone users so you only pay for what you use. Now, it's built on the Sprint network, which has a good, solid backbone, so you get good coverage all over. But they have a simple plan, fair pricing. You bill by the megabyte, the minute, and the text message. That's it. Here's the kicker, right? You're like, oh, great. So what do I have to be locked into? If you use less than anticipated, let's say you sign up for the 50 megabyte plan. If you only use 20 megabytes, you're automatically credited the difference at the end of the month. If you use more, you are billed for the additional amount, but you're not locked into some new contract. You're not given a punitive, wow, you went over the agreed contract amount. They just pay you just pay for the higher tier. Ting.com has no premiums, no penalties. You just pay for what you use. And they offer 4G Android phones through Sprint. Ting website has clear graphic snapshots of usage by device so you can keep track of how close you are to a next tier. If you're like, I kind of need to stay under that 500 megabyte tier, you can do that. That 500 minute tier, you can do that. Lots of control over your features. It's about putting you in charge of what you're paying for. There's a bunch of good tweets we've seen from people. One from a customer back in February. The phone bill was $22 last month. That's almost exactly $100 less than AT&T. Wow. And it's always about people saying, wow, now that I only pay for what I use, I spend less money. So don't wait. You get great customer support. If you use Hover, you already know about their great customer support Two Cows provides. 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email support also great, offering an active discussion forum where you can talk to other folks. You can get support by blog, by tweet, even post release notes. It's a bunch of geeks running a company the way you would want it to be run. And the support folks are smart, too. They're passionate. They're empowered. They know. You don't have to sit there and go through a script with them. They understand that you know what you're talking about, and they get to solving your problem. So go try out their savings calculator if this doesn't convince you. Enter your usage and the cost for the last few months. Ting will tell you how much you would have paid if you were using Ting. And then you can go purchase a phone from Ting right from the website. The prices range from $104 to $545, depending on what kind of phone you want. But you're going to get it for cheaper than anyone else because you're going to get it by going to ting.com/twig and get $50 off the purchase price of a device. Save money and better manage your mobile phone usage, folks. Use Ting. That's ting.com/twig. And we thank ting.com for their support of This Week in Google. All right, stock split, real quick, a bit of a financial story, but the key thing here is not that if you're a stockholder, you're going to now own 2 stocks for every 1 stock. What it is that the stock split is done so that Google can issue a special new class of shares to current shareholders, meaning that Sergey and Larry keep a firmer handle on the company. Jeff, do you understand how this works? I understand the principle, but...
Well, I mean, we see it a lot. Basically, what it is wasn't Mark Zuckerberg smart? That he still is going to go to an IPO maintaining control of his company. And I suspect Larry and Sergey were jealous. And so what they're doing is issuing a non-voting share. And so I'll get both. I am a Google, full disclosure, Google shareholder. Not much, but I got a little bit. And I will get a voting share. I'll get a non-voting share. And they will own most of the voting shares. They already have control of the higher voting class. Very common. The argument is that companies like, I believe, Tribune Company or I think it was Knight Ridder did not have 2-class voting, and thus they lost control very easily, and they were subject to what they would consider financial trolls to come in and shake control of the company. The argument that I've seen basically, and Andrew Ross Sorkin made this in the New York Times, is that as long as we think that Larry and Sergey and Eric are smart and doing good things, well, then hunky-dory. But come the moment when Google goes south, when they leave, when they hire the equivalent of Mr. Pepsi, what happens? The shareholders have no control. Is in the next an obvious question. Always ask as soon as if they eat a non-union tomato, is that evil? That's what we're going to be asked now. Is this evil to do? As much as Wall Street is. It's what Wall Street does. It's what companies do to maintain control of their companies. Having lost control of my magazine, Entertainment Weekly, I get that. You try to do the things that set you up in the future to maintain control of your baby, and you do the best you can, use the tools available, and that's what they did.
Yeah, I got nothing to add to that, Gina. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, seems reasonable. Seems like, it makes sense. I wasn't outraged or anything. I accept Page and Brin as having the most
Your
control.
New master lords, yes.
Yes, exactly.
I suppose long term, it may be worrisome because of what you said about Page and Brin not lasting forever or moving on or whatever. But in the short term, I am a big fan of. If someone is competent and good at what they do, they should stay in charge of it. And we too often move people in and out. I mean, look at Yahoo. You could argue that Jerry Yang is not the right guy to lead that ship for sure, but the constant swap of CEO and every CEO coming in and saying, I've got a new plan. It's very similar to the old plan.
But that's a little bit different. That didn't get fully caused by, the most recent one did get a bit caused by shareholders. That got caused by not having any freaking plans. And so I actually think you're making a good point, but almost in reverse, in the sense that what if Jerry Yang's authority over Yahoo had been concrete? Would they be even worse off now?
And that's possible, right? You could make that argument.
Amazingly,
but my point is, once you lose the founder, whether they're good or bad, you're into this sort of rotato of people who they don't really care about the company. They're a hired gun, and maybe they're good, maybe they're not, but they don't. Right. I get the feeling that most of the problems caused in these situations are because the CEO doesn't really care about the business. and doesn't really understand
the best
the business.
strategy is to have a strategy, number one, and to execute it well. Number two, and as always at moments like this, who's the best example of that? Steve Jobs. He did lose control of his company. The company needed him back. He did so well. Stock structure didn't matter. We were buying his stock like crazy. We're the most valuable company in the world. We love him because he had his strategy well executed.
All right, let's go to a fun rumor. We haven't had a fun rumor. This has all been facts. Are we going to get Google Drive next week? It looks like there's some good leaks from the Next Web. They say they've got sources, they've seen documentation, and it's going to launch next week with a 5 gigabyte for free plan, and then you pay to add to it. Gina, what's your odds?
I don't know. This is a tough one. I feel like we've been hearing this for a long time. This one sounds maybe a little more authentic. Maybe it's just because I want it.
Yeah,
that's what I think the odds are good.
what I'm
going to say the
wondering,
odds are good. I think we're going to see it. I don't know if it's going to be next week because literally, how many times have we seen this story over the past 3 years that Google Drive is,
times.
Here's my question, Gina. Will it be the real question to me is, will it be better than Dropbox?
Yeah, that is the question. I mean, Dropbox is definitely the leader in terms of user experience in this area. So it sounds like from the rumored specs that it's going to be very similar to Dropbox, only that it's going to offer more space.
Yeah, they say it will integrate with Mac and PC. Again, they being the sources, the unnamed sources.
As folders, as regular file system folders, just the way Dropbox does, which is really what's so great about Dropbox. I mean, it just sort of syncs in the end. You're not uploading. It doesn't feel like you're uploading or downloading anything. It just happens.
What added advantages then does Google have over Dropbox? If there are parity in terms of that basic functionality, besides brand, but I mean in terms of functionally, does the fact that Google owns the rest of our lives bring it great advantage, or not really?
Well, it means that they can integrate results from your personal G Drive in your Google search results. Right. Ooh. So it means that, when you have your phone, out with you, you've got access. I mean, the Dropbox is Dropbox and a bunch of other products would do some similar things to Dropbox, but I think Dropbox is the leader.
Okay. So now I predict. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, like, you can have your files anywhere, but with Google, they'll be integrated with the rest of Google's products potentially. So Google
I
Docs
give it 3 weeks before the Wall Street Journal does a panic. Google knows what's in your files now.
Oh, God, yeah. 3 weeks seems long.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is that Google has a lot of it. You can upload files to Google Docs and store them there now. I mean, I think, the thing about Google Drive is that it'll do this auto-syncing. It'll be baked into your operating system. And it sounds like it could do things similar to what Google Desktop used to be, the old, much missed, maybe not much missed, Google Desktop, where you could do searches and it would inject results from your local file system into your Google search results.
Kevin, do you have a sense of whether this Google Drive rumor is the real Google Drive rumor? Are we going to see Google Drive next week?
Who knows? It's possible. I mean, the other thing that they put out today that was interesting was Google Cloud Print will now send to Android. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I did. And Federal Express.
And to Federal Express as well, which is also interesting. So I think that may fit in with this as well. That's more of a sort of document routing system, but it seems an obvious thing to route it to Google Docs too. That's what happens when you get emailed a PDF that you can click on it and send it to Google Docs straight away. So that fitting that together a bit more would make sense too.
That's a really good point.
I mean, it's to some extent some of the Drive stuff is a bit odd. Because particularly on mobile, because actually using a file system on a mobile phone is often fairly painful, and it's certainly something Apple's resisted really hard on the iPhone, to the point where they basically handed it over to third parties to build something that does that for them, which is kind of weird. I'm sort of expecting to do a bit. I expect them to do something a bit better around that too.
Yeah, I would like to see better file management. It doesn't have to be folders even necessarily. I don't care if somebody comes up with a better metaphor, but I want to see better file management.
That'd be fun.
Well, the thing is they've been doing it on the desktop, right? They've built edit history into the operating system now. So the wave I was talking about of the sort of the GitHubization of everything.
Don't say wave, Kevin. Don't use the word wave.
Well, Wave did it too. Wave was an example of this. The point is that it used to be that storage was expensive and slow, and so you had a copy of the document in memory, and then you would be asked every time you wanted to save it out to disk because you didn't want to fill the disk up. And that paradigm is so out of date now. It's kind of embarrassing to try and explain to somebody what the little floppy disk icon is in Microsoft Word when they're sort of less than 20 years old. So the fact that my son's like, what's that? It's a floppy disk. Oh yeah.
It's like the CD icon in iTunes too now. It's going the same way.
Right, but yeah, that's just more recent thing. We still have those around the house. I've floppy disks. I might have a few in the garage somewhere. But the sort of the worldview of you have to load and save is being gradually eroded. Google Docs, ended up sort of having to put it back because people were looking for it. That was some sort of weird user testing thing, but by default they didn't do that. Apple has now changed the operating system with Mountain Lion such that by default it doesn't have save and save as. It has some sense of going back through edit histories there. So they're getting that piece. We've had it as programmers with source code control for a long time, but sort of the GitHub worldview takes that a bit further with the presumption that the first thing you do is clone it into your own repository and then you start forking it and then you can eventually merge stuff back later. But there is an assumption that everything is happening in parallel. Wikipedia has sort of put this into the public consciousness by having publicly visible edit histories and be able to go back and forwards in time. So that paradigm of storage is not a problem, we should keep every version of everything ever, is moving through, and that will be something that you want on mobile too. And that's one of those issues of which have I got on the phone and which have I got in the cloud is the thing that makes it tricky, but it's something that we want. And I think there will be a battle between Apple and Google about how you present that to the user in a coherent way.
Yeah.
And there'll be, so what you're saying too is that we won't just save the current version, they'll be saving your history.
I would assume that will be that's the natural thing to do.
Yeah, you're right.
Everything's moving in that direction.
Yep, got it.
It's sort of even to the point of sort of system design. The sort of the growth of functional programming is all about not having contention over a single copy of things, but having paths through data that are modifying things in their own version of the world, if you like. If you think about the difference between the way JavaScript handles stuff and the way Java handles stuff, Java still has very much a data structure being passed around worldview. JavaScript has closures that are passed around that contain the entire state of the current machine at the time of that event, and then they're held as you go off and do something else and come back, which is one of the reasons that, not to rave too much about Node.js again, but one of the reasons that Node feels so nice when you're writing web programming is that it has the same feel that that you get client side, where you will do something and call something, and then when it comes back you do something else, and you end up writing the server side stuff in the same way, which means it's naturally parallelizable. It's easier to spin up more machines for it because you've written stuff with the presumption that each instance of it is wholly independent. And not everything can be written that way, and the core of Node is in C because it has to deal with that kind of routing. But the spread of that worldview is also really interesting. And there's also the other potential there about the contention between client and server starts getting interesting, because if you're writing the same code in the same language to run on the client and the server, you can decide to migrate bits back and forth much more easily without having to spend so much time deciding which is which and worrying about the boundaries of the world and the different shape of the data structures. So if you're creating a JSON object on the server and passing it to the client, you can decide whether you do that or not, and which point you render it and which point you don't. So there's that sort of fluidity, I think, is going to become more important over time, and we're seeing the beginnings of that in various directions as programmers' worldview change, and I think that permeates out to the world as programmers we make those ideas available to the public.
And then it frees us up from worrying about where our data is stored, to be honest.
It can help for that. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
It gets us down that road to that mesh. A couple of things we want to finish up with here. First of all, FCC has cleared Google over the Wi-Fi eavesdropping from the Google Street View. They're not going to pay anything for that, but they are going to pay $25,000 for being uncooperative. In fact, the FCC said they seem to be the world leader in search unless they're searching for an email that we want from them. That's not an exact quote, but they said something pretty close to that.
And meanwhile, though, this thing will not die. Now, at the same time, we think we're finally getting toward the end of it. Ed Markey in Congress comes out demanding a new investigation of the same bogus thing. You know, Congressman, our country's in a mess. People don't have health care. They don't have mortgages. We're losing our homes. Europe is falling along. Move on!
Yeah, a little snippet of my SSID in a piece of data that Google wants to delete, but you won't let them is not my biggest problem.
Tired of this one.
Yeah.
I'm so tired.
Also, Eileen was very insistent that we talk about the Tupac hologram that was at Coachella this weekend. It was what was called a Pepper's Ghost, which is a rear projection that makes it look like it's in 3 dimensions. Pretty difficult to do, especially in those live circumstances like that. But what impressed me was the fact that they had a full performance referring to Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre, who were on the stage with them, saying, "Hey, Coachella," just very in context from somebody who's been dead for several years. An impressive bit of CGI, if nothing else.
Definitely. I was really impressed at how good it looked. I've been hearing about it, but I didn't watch the video until just before the show. And I was like, oh, wow. I was kind of I listened to TNT yesterday, and I think Sarah said that she just thinks it's weird, and I agree with her. But then you said, but it's such great technology. And I went from Sarah to Tom when I saw the video. I was like, this is amazing technology. It looks really good.
Yeah, I don't disagree with Sarah on the weirdness, although we had a caller who explained that, they talked to the family and made sure that the family was okay, and the family was actually cool with it. They thought it was a good memorial, et cetera. Still kind of weird, but just if you forget about that, just the ability to actually create someone. I mean,
I know.
Incredible. I don't know what other applications you can have with this, but it just, as we've gone from putting somebody in Forrest Gump in a scene that already existed to having actors in famous movies say other lines in a DirecTV commercial than the lines they actually said, to this, I mean, we're not that far down the road from just being able to create performances out of nothing.
I want the Gina hologram next to me to fix my problems in technology today.
The Ginagram.
The Ginagram. I don't know if you want that. You might the Leogram, I think.
I want my very own Gina right next to me.
There's a brilliant novel by Connie Willis that was written about 20 years ago that talks about what will happen when this is possible and the future of movies when you can recreate people from archival material called Remake. I really recommend that if you want to sort of find someone who's thought this through once already.
That's by Connie Willis, did you say?
Connie Willis, yes, yeah. Remake.
I have to check that out.
Probably, or if you're smart, you should option the film rights of it now because it's actually possible. This is something that people have been able to do to some extent for a while. If you actually think about many, serious Hollywood pictures, they have chunks of this going on where they're either repainting the leads over the stuntmen or they're, creating characters from whole cloth like Gollum. But there hasn't been as much of this sort of, rebuild an existing person from their pre-existing footage stuff. There's been bits of it, but there were adverts that had Fred Astaire in and things like that. But But to actually turn them into a full puppet that somebody can perform or that somebody can render is a tougher problem. And technology catches up with that. There's a bit of uncanny valley to it, but it's getting closer to being convincing.
Definitely. Let's finish up with our picks. Kevin, let me know if you've got one, and I'll get to you in a second. But we'll start off with Gina. I think we may have stepped on yours a little bit.
That's it. Yeah, Kevin mentioned it earlier. This is really cool new thing in Chrome. Google Cloud Print now supports ice cream sandwich Android devices and can print to your local FedEx office. So if you're at a coffee shop or you're at Buena Gardens like Kevin usually is, or you're just in a hotel or wherever and you want to print something in Chrome, from the print dialog, you can choose Google Cloud Print from the printer dropdown. And in the latest version of Chrome, it will show you your ice cream sandwich devices, and you can say print to my local FedEx office, and then you can go pick up your printout there. So neat new feature in Google Cloud Print.
Some people may say, well, why would I want to print to the FedEx office? But I had a big, hefty legal thing that I had to go and make a copy of at the FedEx office because it was so huge. I wasn't going to do it on my little Epson at home, right? So
right.
I had to take it down with a file and then give them the file. And then,
so annoying.
This would have been so much better. I would have just emailed it or printed it and then gone and picked it up at my leisure.
Absolutely. For anything that long documents that you want a nice printout at and you don't want to use, your home ink, it's great.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I hope you weren't turning into a patent troll. It wasn't a patent suit, Tom.
It was, well, I've got a patent for displaying excellent journalism printouts behind me in a method and apparatus for doing that in a video stream. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. But in the meantime, what's your number, Jeff?
Well, this one is not my number, and pardon me for looking away, folks, but because I have two machines, I guess the first number is 1. The year of my life I lost through fighting with bandwidth today. The second not my number is Richard Branson. I don't know if this is new or not, but Richard Branson invested in the next round in Path with Redpoint, Greylock, Kleiner Perkins, Index, Mark Pincus, Yuri Milner, Allen and Company. This is what Instagram hath wrought. But the real number of the week, a nice little Accenture survey that found that I found this fascinating. 64% of U.S. customers recall seeing social media icons while watching TV. In other words, when the weatherman says, "You can find me on Twitter," and a third of them have interacted with a social service after seeing the symbol on the screen. How important is that to future views of what advertising means and the connection that it creates? Facebook, etc., said, of course, led the way. 42% say they had noticed a Facebook-like symbol while watching a TV show and knew how to interact with it. 20% said they ended up liking the TV program while watching. Some other quick numbers. 43% said obtaining more information about a show, product, or service, they'd use social media. 2% said it used it to get social coupons. 31% entered cost us, and so on and so on and so on. It just really emphasizes that if you wonder why Facebook is going to be worth what it's going to be worth when the IPO hits, that they've not even begun to plumb and mine yet, this is the kind of stuff it is. That the direct connection that social creates between a brand and its customer replaces advertising cost and supplants advertising functionality, is better than a message, is truly a relationship. It's something that brands are starting to learn that media have not yet learned, apart from the likes of Leo Laporte et al. And so that's my numbers of the week.
All right. Thank you for that. My tool is an extension I don't think has been covered on Twig. That when I went from Chrome recently and switched to Firefox for a while, and then I had to go back to Chrome, one of the things I missed from Firefox is when I click on a tab, it opens all the way to the right. In Chrome, the default is to have it open right next to the tab you're in. Tabs Plus is an extension on Chrome. Not Tabs Mix Plus, but Tabs Plus allows you to customize lots of different tab behaviors. Choose where the focus will be after closing a tab. Choose the default behavior for a new tab. You can pin current tabs so they won't be used for the last selected behavior. Lots of cool stuff. The biggest thing I do is I have it changed that my tabs open as last in the row, so they always open all the way to the right, because that's just the way I like it. But check it out, Tabs Plus. It's a good Chrome extension that I use every day. It's a little bit wonky at first because what it does is it opens the tab and then moves it. So you'll see it open next to your tab and then move over. Here, I'll go do it. Check this out. You open the tab. Wait. Real quick, you see it, and then
pretty quick,
and then it shoves it over there. But I got used to it, so it's fine, and it works for me. So Tabs Plus, check it out in the Chrome Web Store. And we'll finish up, Kevin. You've got a tip as well.
More of a call to action, really. The UK government is putting out a consultation on open standards, and they're accepting submissions from individuals as well as companies. So far, my understanding is they've had a lot of submissions from large IP lawyers saying that patents are a wonderful thing and promote standards. And it would be great if we could send them some submissions that were more along the lines of patents are creating a terrible problem for the internet economy. So that's something I wanted to share with people here in case that they, knowing how big this audience is. So you can find that, and the URL is a bit long, but it's consultation.cabinetoffice.gov.uk/open standards. And it'll be good to send. They have got a series of questions they're asking. So if you can give them a sort of well-reasoned response with pointing to evidence, that would be useful. Just in getting them to think about this, and in a similar way to getting the U.S. Congress to rethink patents will be good too.
Yeah, absolutely. No, great stuff. Thank you, Kevin. And thanks, everybody, for watching or listening. Leo will be back from NAB tomorrow, so he'll be back next week on Twig. Gina Trapani, thank you so much for making ThinkUp, first of all, which I'm a big fan of, and for being on the show, smarterware.org. Anything else to let folks know about before we go?
That's it. Just check out thinkupapp.com. And thanks a lot, Tom.
Thank you. Jeff Jarvis, thank you for struggling through the bandwidth, the mire, and the
Thank you
muck.
for being tolerant of it. And thank you, Eileen, for going for the visual punchline.
And I'm going to show you a video. This is this video at the end when we say goodbye to everybody.
We've got,
Just
we
for
have a
you.
special treat. Hopefully it'll make things better.
I think.
Buzzmachine.com, anything, and public parts, and Gutenberg to Geek.
Gutenberg the Geek is apparently going to get translated into Chinese and Japanese. Wow.
Oh, congrats.
Now I have a reason to learn Chinese and Japanese.
Yeah.
Kevin Marks, always a pleasure to have you on any show I do. You bring such depth of knowledge and wisdom. It's great to have you along. Of course, tunnelvision.tv, which you do with some great folks, some of my favorite folks over there. Let folks know what that is real quick and where they can find it.
So tunnelvision.tv is a podcast we do live every Thursday. We've hit episode 100 this week.
Congratulations.
There's a great archive stuff there. And it's about the skills you need, the sort of social skills you need in technology. So it's the Tumla is the Jewish person who would get people to dance with each other at weddings and make the party actually happen. And we think that's the skill set that's really important for social media. So that's what the show's about. The other thing that I would say is if you're thinking of developing stuff, use Heroku, which is owned by Salesforce, which I work for. But having hacked on it this weekend, I can wholeheartedly endorse that as a way of getting websites up quickly and usefully.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for watching or listening. We are, of course, fans of all kinds of IPA here at This Week at Google. Lee will be back next time. We'll see you then.